I'd like to preface this by saying that I live a pretty quote-unquote straight-edge lifestyle, so I'm certain that what I saw and heard last New Year's Eve wasn't the result of some hallucination or drunken stupor, but was 100% real. I live on the outskirts of your stereotypical small southern town, so a few of my friends live out further into the boondocks that are only accessible by those dark, country back roads. One of my friends, Darren, lives with his family in one of the richer neighborhoods in the area that can only be reached by these back roads. Every year, his family throws a party at their house on New Year's Eve where all the family's friends are invited, myself included. It's a pretty fun occasion, so I'm always excited when I get the formal invitation from Darren's parents in the mail. Seeing as the weather in the south can be pretty weird when it comes to winter, it didn't get really cold until a few days before New Year's Eve. I could remember the newly frigid air paired with the bumpy, unkempt country roads made for an uncomfortable ride to the house. Usually I don't drive with my brights on since I hate how other drivers always blind me with theirs, but the sheer darkness of the windy, narrow road made it a necessity this time. Anyways, the narrow road was surrounded on both sides by dense tree line, so even with my brights, it was hard to see where exactly all the twists and turns were ahead. Notably, there aren't any other houses between the turnoff to the road and Darren's neighborhood, except for a lone shack that seemed like it had been abandoned for years, though I could sometimes see lights on inside whenever I passed this way. A few minutes into the drive, on a particularly straight section of the road, my lights illuminated something ahead amongst the trees, something white against the darkness. As I neared, I could see it was the shape of a person standing all alone on the side of the road. They weren't moving or hiding, just standing completely still with their back to the trees. It was a woman, evidently wearing a white dress or gown of some sort, not at all appropriate for the cold. I didn't turn my brights off out of caution, so I couldn't really make out any specific details in the reflective glare of the white dress as I passed her. I was thanking my lucky stars that she didn't step out in the middle of the road, causing me to stop. But then I started to wonder if maybe I should have stopped to see if she needed some help. Perhaps she was another guest trying to get to Darren's party, but it wasn't until I looked back in my mirror to see in the red glare of my rear lights that the woman had turned her body to follow me, still frozen in that one spot. It was definitely creepy, and in that moment, I was glad I'm not the greatest example of a good Samaritan. No way was that a fellow party guest. I arrived at the party without any further incident around 8 p.m., parking in the gravel circle amongst the dozen or so other cars outside Darren's house, which situated in a large clearing in the surrounding forest, just like all the other spaced out houses in the neighborhood. The festivities went on until we had watched both the ball drop in New York, as well as our own time zone's clocks striking 12, after which everyone slowly started to clear out. I stayed behind a bit to help clean up as I usually did, since I was one of the closer friends of Darren's family, and by the time I myself left, my car was the only one left at the front of the house. When I got in and started it up, I got a low tire pressure light. My car is an older model, so it didn't give me exact details as to which tire was low or how many had the issue. Before I freaked out, I remembered that this sort of thing always happens with my tires when the weather first turned cold after a long warm period. I figured I'd be able to make it home okay. But before I drove off, I remembered that woman I had seen on my way there. Was she still out there somewhere? Had anyone else come across her? There was another way in the opposite direction I could use to get home to avoid that road, but it would add another 20 minutes or so to my commute, which I didn't want to do so late at night and with possible drunk drivers out and about. I figured I'd just suck it up and just go back the way I came. I really wish I didn't. Not even a few minutes out on that same dark back road, I could feel something was different with my tires. I could hear it too. It sounded like bare metal scraping against the road. Slowly, my car came to a dead stop. Shit, I muttered. This was a different situation entirely. All that was going through my head was, did my tires fall off? Against my better judgment, I had to get out of the car to see what was wrong. Stupidly, I turned the engine off and shut the door. The car's lights turned off automatically, and I was plunged into the deep darkness of the surrounding forest. With my phone flashlight, I scanned each of my tires. My heart sank, as each and every one of them had been ripped to shreds, as if they were torn apart by the claws of some animal. I could have reasoned that if one had a large puncture in it, the bumpy road could have caused even more damage. But all 4 tires? This was deliberate. But no, I thought. Could it have been? I stood around hopelessly. No one would be out at such an hour on this road, even on New Year's Eve. I'd have to call a towing service or for someone to come and get me. But of course, there was no phone service this deep into the boonies. But just as I was about to get back into the car, the gentle wind died down. The barren tree branches stopped swaying, and even the wildlife that was still out this time of year went quiet. I froze. I had never heard such silence before. It was as if time had stopped for a minute before I heard the sickening sound of a twig snap somewhere within the trees. Something was moving around. I instantly shut the light from my phone off, leaving complete darkness. Leaves on the ground continued to rustle, as if someone was stalking through the forest. Was it a squirrel, a deer? No. This was the type of silence of prey when a predator was nearby. And then I heard, "I see you." My stomach dropped. All the air was sucked out of my body. I couldn't even scream. It was a woman's voice, soft and quiet, coming from the pitch-black darkness of the tree line not 15 feet away. It was said without malice, which somehow made it even freakier. In that moment, all I wanted to do was just shrivel up onto the ground and die. And then I heard, "Can you see me?" It wasn't until I heard the voice again that my fight or flight response kicked in, but I was disoriented, standing there in the darkness. I had to turn my phone light back on if I wanted to see which direction I wanted to flee. I aimed the flashlight directly in front of me, and standing at the edge of the tree line was the woman in the white gown, this time her features visible. The gown was dirty, covered in dark stains. She was deathly pale, skinny as a rail, and her disheveled gray hair fell down to her elbows. But her face was almost indescribable, grotesque, as if she were missing half of her jaw, yet it seemed as though she were trying to grin at me. In my indecisive horror, I had the flashlight trained on her for a few moments before I hauled ass down the road back towards Darren's house. That shack I had mentioned earlier was closer to my current position down the opposite direction, but what if this woman was the one who actually lived there? I don't know if that was a rational thought made in the spur of the moment, but I had no time to wonder. As I sprinted down the road, I could hear the snapping of twigs and rustling of leaves behind me. She was chasing me, but I was quickly able to lose her with such a massive rush of adrenaline. I made it back to Darren's house, ignoring the rest of the neighborhood, and I pounded on the door, pleading for the door to open up. His mother answered the door and quickly ushered me inside, seeing how shaken up I was, where I explained everything to her along with Darren and his father. They were sympathetic, offering to let me stay the night there while they called the police and a towing service, which I gladly accepted before even contacting my own family. The police said they would search the area around the road that night and that I could come get my car back and make a statement the next day. But all I wanted to do for now was put that night behind me and fade to sleep in the guest bedroom. But I soon found out that night wasn't over. I awoke from my sleep to the sound of a light tap from the second-story window. I looked at the digital clock on the nightstand. I remember the time exactly. 3:14 a.m. Of course, none of the windows in the room had blinds. I didn't dare look out until I heard the muffled voice from outside, the same voice saying, "I see you." The woman was still out there. She had chased me all the way here, and now she was throwing rocks to get my attention. If I wasn't going to look out the window before, I definitely wasn't going to now. I wasn't going to leave my spot in that bed or fall asleep until morning. When the sun rose and Darren's family woke up, the woman was gone, thankfully. I told them what else happened, and we all looked outside together before the police showed up. In the yard, about where I had heard the voice coming from, Darren's father found a large, rusty knife that didn't belong to the family, presumably what the woman had used when slashing my tires. But that also meant she had followed my car there to the party at the beginning of the night, and specifically targeted me when everyone else was inside during the festivities. Darren's parents called and asked the other party guests if they had seen anything suspicious the night before, and one of their friends said they had seen someone in a white dress walking around outside from the window, but thought nothing of it, seeing as how people were coming and going all night. When I gave the police my statement, I told them to check around that shack on the road here, as I had a hunch that woman had something to do with it. They eventually did, and updated me that they found no one living there, but there was dead, gutted wildlife sprawled all around the surrounding woods. That woman I saw was never found, which of course raises a bunch of questions. The scariest ones to me, though, are how she was able to track me down so quickly once I left the party, and if she was missing so much of her face, how was she able to pronounce those words so clearly? Despite what happened, I'll still be going to Darren's house for New Year's Eve again this year, but this time, I'll make sure to carpool and take the long way around.